concerns about Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, human rights and restrictions on rights and freedoms in Hong Kong, including the case of Jimmy Lai and the completely unjustified sanctions against British parliamentarians. A key outcome of this dialogue is that we have secured China's commitment to improve existing channels so that we can openly discuss sensitive issues and the ways in which they impact our economy. Because if we do not engage with China, we cannot raise our real concerns. This dialogue is just one part of our engagement with trading partners right across the world. Since becoming Chancellor, I've been to New York, Washington, Toronto and Brussels to build our global economic relationships, whilst my Right Honourable friend, the Business Secretary, has travelled to the Gulf to boost trade and investment, and my Right Honourable friend, the Home Foreign Secretary, is engaging with partners all over the world to deliver growth which benefits people across the United Kingdom. Because we must continue to go further and faster in driving economic growth to make working people better off. That is why yesterday the Prime Minister launched our AI Opportunities Action Plan to throw the full weight of government behind artificial intelligence in the UK, revolutionising our public services and making our economy more productive. It is why next week I will be meeting with business leaders, investors and entrepreneurs at the World Economic Forum meeting in Davos to make the case that the UK is one of the best places in the world to invest. And in the coming weeks, I will be setting out further details of our plans to kickstart growth in the economy after 14 years of failure from the party opposite.
Shadow Chancellor Checker Belstride.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Can I at the outset say it is good to see the Chancellor in her place and to thank her for advance sight of her statement. Mr. Speaker, I know that the Chancellor has been away, so let me update her on the mess that she left behind. The pound has hit a 14-month low. Government borrowing costs are at a 27-year high. Growth has been killed stone dead. Inflation is rising, impacting millions. Interest rates are staying higher for longer, and business confidence has fallen through the floor. The party opposite talked down the economy. They crippled businesses with colossal taxes, breaking all their promises. This is a crisis made in Downing Street. And, Mr. Speaker, it should hardly surprise the Chancellor that international markets are uneasy. The UK's long-term borrowing costs have risen to their highest in almost 30 years. But while the government was losing control of the economy, Mr. Speaker, where was the Chancellor? Her trip to China had not even begun when my urgent question was taken in the House last week. She was still in the country. But she sent the Chief Secretary rather than face up to her own failures. So can I ask the Right Honourable Lady why she chose not to respond herself? Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor, of course, ducked the difficult questions by jetting off to Beijing. I believe that in Labour circles they are calling it the Peking duck, Mr. Speaker. Well, whatever was on the menu in China, was it really worth the unedifying sight of an increasingly desperate politician scampering halfway around the world with a begging bowl? Was it really worth it? The Chancellor's deal pales in comparison to Labour's black hole, which has opened up in the public finances while the Right Honourable Lady was absent from her station. To give a sense of scale, Mr. Speaker, the deal the Chancellor has announced amounts to £120 million per year. The rise in our borrowing costs due to her disastrous budget has added around £12 billion to our annual spending on debt interest alone. Literally 100 times what she says she has brought back from Beijing. That is money that cannot now go on the public's priorities. 12 billion is enough to pay for 300,000 nurses, to cover Labour's pernicious winter fuel payments cut for 8.5 years. And of course, even before this latest market reaction, the budget meant spending tens of billions more in servicing our debt. According to the OBR forecast, 2/3 of the money raised from the Chancellor's jobs tax will be swallowed up by additional debt interest. Forget those billions going on better public services. They are going on paying the price of Labour's mismanagement. And we on this side know how this sorry story goes. We have seen it, Mr. Speaker. We have seen it all before. Socialist governments that think they can tax and spend their way to prosperity. Labour governments that simply do not understand that if you tax the living daylights out of business, you will get stagnation. They do not understand, Mr. Speaker, because there's barely a shred of business experience on the front bench opposite. And can I ask the Right Honourable Lady, which of her promises will she break if in March the OBR judge that she is now in breach of her own fiscal rules? Will she cancel promised spending? Will she ramp up borrowing? Or will she raise taxes yet again? Mr. Speaker, this whole sorry tale is nothing short of a Shakespearean tragedy, playing out before our eyes. This is the Hamlet of our time. They promised the electorate much while pouring the poison into their ear. At the end, you can feel the end. The Chancellor flailing, estranged it seems from those closest to her, those about her falling, the drums beating ever closer. To go or not to go, that is now a question. The Prime Minister will be damned if he does, but he will surely be damned if he does not. The British people deserve better.
Yeah. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Chancellor is simply not serious. I mean, I've been on that side for 14 years. I think that usually when you have a statement, you ask some questions. Now, we heard a lot from the Right Honourable gentleman about what he wouldn't do. But we've heard absolutely nothing about what he would do. Now, you can now see what happens when the Leader of the Opposition tells the Shadow Cabinet that they shouldn't have any policies. Because, as far as I can tell, the Conservative Party's economic strategy is to say that the UK should not engage with the second largest economy in the world. Or indeed with our nearest neighbours and our biggest trading partners in the European Union. His economic strategy is to support higher spending, but none of the right decisions that are required to deliver sound public finances. And his economic strategy is to ignore the mistakes of the past, with no apology to the British people for his part in Liz Truss's mini-budget that crashed the economy. Now, I mentioned Liz Truss's mini-budget, but I appreciate that, having said that, I may now receive a cease and desist letter from her later. Now, the one question that the Shadow Chancellor did ask was, why did I go to China? Well, I went to secure tangible benefits for British businesses trading overseas. And the Shadow Chancellor said, well, it wasn't worth it. Well, you say that to HSBC, to Standard Chartered, Prudential, Schroders and the London Stock Exchange, who attended those meetings with me last week and have all said about the difference that it will make. Now, I have been under no illusion about the scale that we face. After 14 years of stagnant economic growth, higher debt and economic uncertainty. And we have seen global economic uncertainty play out in the last week. But leadership is not about ducking these challenges. It is about rising to them. The economic headwinds that we face are a reminder that we should, indeed we must, go further and faster in our plan to kick-start economic growth that plunged under the last government. By bringing stability to the public finances after years of instability under the party opposite, unlocking investment that plummeted under the previous government, and pushing ahead with the essential reforms to our economy and public services. That is my message to the House today, because if we get it right, the prize on offer to us, to the British people, is immense. The opportunity to make working people off by making Britain better off. That is the mandate that this government has, and this is what we will deliver.
Chair of the Treasury Select Committee, Dane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's commitment to growth in this country and to encourage investment in the UK. Listening, though, to the Shadow Chancellor, you'd think that the country was going to hell in a handcart. And doesn't she agree with me that there is no time for panic, that it is perfectly possible to manage any pressures on the budget through astute management of public spending, and that compared with the years of austerity on the last side, we are a very, very long way from that approach?
Chancellor.
I thank the Chair of the Select Committee for that question. I set out the fiscal rules of this government at the budget in October, that we will pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts and that we will get debt down as a share of the economy. We remain committed to those fiscal rules and we will meet them at all times.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Chancellor for advance sight of her statement. Let's be blunt. The budget hasn't worked. The Chancellor says that the government's #1 mission is growth, but to date there are no signs that the government is going to deliver it. The national insurance contributions rise is self-defeating. It undermines growth, it does not unleash it, and it piles pressure onto struggling small businesses and high streets. Neither does it raise anything like the sums of money for the NHS which the government initially suggested that it would. Now we have this much-lauded visit to China, but the government itself says that it is only worth £600 million to the UK over the next 5 years. This is equivalent to just 5.5 hours of NHS spending a year. That is 27.5 hours over the 5-year period. Mr. Speaker, all growth is welcome, but this really is small beer. And what, Mr. Speaker, are we to make of the Chancellor's pledge to improve existing channels with China? This is nothing short of warm words and mixed messages. The Chancellor should not have gone to China unless there was a commitment that Jimmy Lai was going to be released. Does the Chancellor now accept that the national insurance increase will damage growth? Does the Chancellor accept that there were and still are much fairer ways to raise the necessary revenue without holding back our economy and our high streets? The international market jitters we have seen in the last few days are largely caused by the threat of tariffs by the new Trump administration. So will the Chancellor guard against the risks of a Trump presidency by rebuilding our trading relationship with our European neighbours? And after the economic vandalism of the previous Conservative government and their mini-budget, our NHS and care services are still on their knees. Does the Chancellor accept that wealth and health are two sides of the same coin, and that scaling back any investment in the NHS would not only be devastating for local communities, but also damaging for economic growth?
I'm slightly confused by the response from the Honourable Lady. They oppose every decision that we made to get the public finances under control at the budget, and now they say that we need to spend more on public services. Well, I'm afraid the Honourable Lady can't have it both ways. The only way that there's more money for our public services is by raising that, as we did in the budget, decisions that the Liberal Democrats apparently oppose. And then the Honourable Lady says that £600 million isn't worth it. Well, that's £600 million of tangible benefits for British businesses trading overseas. I would have thought that the Honourable Lady would welcome enhanced trade and investment as a way to create more good jobs, paying decent wages in St Albans and indeed in all of our constituencies. Now, the Honourable Lady says that we shouldn't go to China because we need to raise difficult issues. Well, I'm not sure how the Honourable Lady thinks we're going to raise difficult issues unless we engage with the second biggest economy in the world. And because I went to China, I was able to raise issues around human rights, around forced labour, around Hong Kong and Jimmy Lai, and around the sanctioning of parliamentarians. You can't raise those issues unless you were in the room. I was in the room and therefore able to do just that. And I would finally just say to the Honourable Lady, this is the party that put £20 billion into the National Health Service at the budget in October. We were able to do that because of difficult decisions that we took, including on taxation. The Honourable Lady seems to want the additional money for public services, but without finding any way to pay for them. Well, that is the way that the party opposite got into the troubles they got into. I'm afraid the Liberal Democrats are going down exactly the same path.
Rachel Blake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for raising the case of my constituent, Jimmy Lai? I know it will mean a lot to him and to his family. And does she agree with me that it is because of the profound differences that it is vital that we maintain this strategic engagement?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for what she's just said, and I think on behalf of the whole House we would want to send our best wishes to the family of Jimmy Lai at this difficult time. I had the opportunity to raise this as well as other issues during my time in China, and I think it is incredibly important that at every opportunity that we have, we raise some of the difficult issues and challenge the Chinese authorities in the way that is appropriate and consistent with our British values.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the economic and financial dialogue was stayed because of the brutal imposition of the national security law in Hong Kong. So when the Chancellor and the Government now go back to engage and reopen that dialogue, she does so on the back that things have got worse, not better. And the reality I want to put to her is that while she was away, Cheyenne refused point blank in a select committee to answer the question whether they had slave labour in their supply chains, but the government wants them to register here in London. We have solar arrays being imported by the government here into the UK that demonstrably contain slave labour. So can I ask the Chancellor to be clear now to the House about the government's position on slave labour? Can she explain whether this government will allow any products or services or companies to align themselves here or import goods into here that contain any slave labour, no matter how important that import is?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for that question, and I know how importantly he takes this issue, along with so many other members on both sides of the House. Listing of companies in the UK is a decision for the Financial Conduct Authority, but any company listing on the London Stock Exchange has to live up to the responsibilities set out by the United Nations and the OECD on issues of forced labour, and this government is committed to working with international partners and businesses to ensure that global supply chains are free from human and labour rights abuses. As the right honourable gentleman knows, under Section 54 of the Modern Slavery Act 2015, commercial businesses who operate in the UK and have a turnover of more than £36 million are required to report annually on the steps they have taken, and quite right so, because modern slavery is absolutely abhorrent and this government continues to take steps to deal with it.
Stephen Sander.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, may I remind members opposite that UK bond yields are rising for the same reason German and French bond yields are, and that is because they are tracking the US rate. They never were very good at numbers, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor set out her economic philosophy that our prosperity is built upon secure foundations, indeed in a more uncertain world. Can the Chancellor set out how she is building that economic security here, and particularly with reference to having domestic energy rather than dependent on foreign fossil fuel dictators?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and he is absolutely right that economic growth has to be built on strong foundations, and that is the approach of this government. And indeed, our mission to make Britain a clean energy superpower is consistent with that, because if we can wean ourselves off fossil fuels and dictators for oil, then we will be more secure in our economy because we do not have to import so much from overseas.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's good to see the Chancellor back from China, and it's good to hear her reiterate that growth is her #1 mission, because we haven't had any growth since her budget. And I just would like to ask the Chancellor today, because accepting responsibility is the first step in solving a problem, will she accept that her budget last October has caused business confidence and growth prospects in this country's economy to plunge?
I thought for a moment that the honourable lady was going to apologise for Liz Truss's mini-budget, maybe on another opportunity.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Chancellor for raising the case of Jimmy Lai. I hope the government will in future as well press on the case of pensions owed to BNO constituents of Early and Woodley across the UK who have moved here from Hong Kong. I was surprised to hear the Shadow Minister advocate the kind of knee-jerk responses to intraday movements in market prices. It's this kind of short-termism, I would argue, Madam Deputy Speaker, that has led the party opposite to have 5 chancellors in only 4 years. Can our Chancellor reassure us that she will not be misled by such short-termism and instead keep her focus on the long-term ambitions of our government to raise living standards and to raise growth?
Chancellor.
The honourable lady, my honourable friend, is absolutely right. And there has been global movements in international markets in the last week or so, and those have been global in nature. But in the UK, we must do what we can, and that's why I've reiterated today my commitment to the fiscal rules that I set out in the budget in October, and reiterate that growth is the #1 mission of this government. Growth built on stability, which came through securing the public finances, through investment, including through the National Wealth Fund and GB Energy, and reform of our pension system, our planning system to make it easier to build in Britain, getting people back to work, and reforming our pension system. This government is cracking on after 14 years of failure from the party opposite.
Esther McVeigh.
Did the Communist Party of China tell the Chancellor she was doing a good job running the UK economy or a bad job running the UK economy when she was there?
I wasn't seeking assurance from any foreign government of the performance of this government. What I was seeking to do, and what I achieved in China, was getting tangible outputs for British businesses trading overseas, helping create more good jobs, paying decent wages here in Britain, something that the party opposite absolutely failed to do in 14 years.
Tim Rocker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor for her statement, and I particularly welcome the fact that she raised the issue of Jimmy Lai and human rights in Beijing. I think that's really, really important. After 14 years of inconsistency on China by the party opposite, does she agree with me that we need a cross-Whitehall strategy and a pragmatic approach?
I think what is really important is that we take decisions in the national interest for Britain. And to take decisions in the national interest, that does mean engaging with our trading partners all around the world, which is why, since being appointed as Chancellor, I've been to Brussels to reset our relations with the European Union, as well as being in Washington and New York to welcome investment from overseas. And that's why I was in China, securing £600 million worth of benefits for UK businesses doing business in China.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Will the Chancellor of the Exchequer do what the Prime Minister refused to do yesterday and rule out future spending cuts?
Chancellor.
I'm not going to write 5 years' worth of budgets in the first 6 months of Labour government. But I'm absolutely committed to meeting the fiscal rules that I set out in the budget October, because we know what happens when governments lose control of the public finances, and that is they crash the economy and end up on that side of the House.
John Grady.
I'm obliged, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor may be able to learn a bit about emergency spending cuts from the Scottish Government in Holyrood, which has had 3 years of emergency spending budget cuts. Would the Chancellor agree with me that it's essential to engage with a large economy like China so that we can export our brilliant financial services sector and whisky from Scotland? And in the real world, we have to trade with large economies like China.
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and many of the benefits that we secured last week were for the financial services sector, and both Edinburgh and Glasgow are important hubs for financial services in the UK. Businesses like Aberdeen and Standard Chartered, who were on the delegation with me last week, have welcomed the tangible benefits that will result in more jobs and more economic prosperity for Scotland and across the United Kingdom.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It has been reported that whilst in China the Chancellor was going to meet the owners of British Steel. Many of my constituents work at the Scunthorpe Steelworks. Is she able, whilst I appreciate ministers may not have reached final decision on this, is she able to give any optimism to my, any reassurance to my constituents that she has had constructive engagement?
Chancellor.
My right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, has met Mr Lee from Xingye on a number of occasions. Talks are ongoing, but I'm not able to provide an update on that today.
Preet Gill.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor has only my admiration and support for the tough decisions she is taking to fix the fundamentals. And while this week's members opposite were carping about the Chancellor's whereabouts, she was having serious discussions with the world's second largest economy, securing access for UK firms. Isn't it clear that only one side of this House is serious about growth?
I will always stand up for Britain's national interest and Britain's economic interest, which is why I am helping British businesses, some of our best British businesses, to export around the world. That's what I'm doing. It did in China at the weekend, and that is what I will continue to do, always standing up for our economic interest.
Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Has the Chancellor of the Exchequer spoken with the Governor of the Bank of England to talk about what action needs to be taken to bring about stability in our bond markets?
Chancellor.
Well, I regularly speak to the Governor of the Bank of England. Indeed, he was on the delegation to China with me this weekend, and we work closely together to ensure that the British economy remains competitive in global markets.
Katie White.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm quite surprised at the audaciousness of the benches opposite. Whoever saw the debt levels rise over the last 14 years, it's just a shame they didn't turn their minds to it earlier. But does the Chancellor agree that serious discussions like these can deliver not just on our economic aims, but on our wider climate and international objectives?
Chancellor.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that question. Unless we engage and work with our partners around the world, we're going to miss out on the opportunities that other countries secure for their businesses and their economies. And if we miss out on those investment opportunities and those trade opportunities, you can be sure that other countries will take advantage of them. That's why I was in China. That's why I will work with counterparts around the world to secure good outcomes for British businesses and jobs here in the United Kingdom.
Dr Andrew Mirison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor has been raising human rights abuses in China, but did she get the opportunity to raise with her interlocutors the extrajudicial work of the United Front Work Department, particularly in relation to UK institutions and especially universities?
Yes, good question.
Chancellor.
I raised a number of issues around human rights abuses, labour issues, and indeed rights and freedoms in Hong Kong, including the case of Jimmy Lai. I raised that with all of the ministers that I met in China, always standing up for our values and our interests.
Kanishkinarian.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Unlike the party bickering on the opposition, we are cutting deals in the British national interest and putting Britain at the frontier. 600 million just over this weekend, an AI opportunities plan just this week. Does the Chancellor agree with me that we are the party of action, they are the party of rhetoric?
Chancellor. I thank my honourable friend for that question. You know, we're on this side of the House and not going to apologise by getting a good deal for British businesses and people working for them. I'm determined to leave no stone unturned in ensuring that British businesses have the rights and the freedoms to export and trade around the world, helping to create good jobs here in Britain.
Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. UK exports to China currently represent less than 10% of UK total exports, whereas our exports to the EU represent over 40%, representing, as it does, the greater opportunities available to our small and medium enterprises in trading with the EU. Will the Chancellor commit to spending 4 times as much time talking to our European partners about our trading opportunities as she has done to China?
Chancellor, I would just say to the honourable lady, it's not either or. We can't write off one country and say we're going to put all our eggs in a different basket. China is our 4th biggest trading partner, and we can't miss out on opportunities for a country that is growing quickly with an expanding middle class, where there are huge export opportunities. But as the honourable lady knows, I was in Brussels in December to reset our relations, the first British Chancellor to go to a Eurogroup meeting since we left the European Union. So I'm leaving no stone unturned to exploit export opportunities for British businesses.
Callum Anderson.
And I thank the Chancellor for her statement. Can she set out in more detail how the government intends to help reinvigorate the UK-China Stock Connect so that UK companies and investors can access Chinese capital markets and vice versa?
Chancellor.
Stock Connect is an initiative first set up by former Conservative Chancellor Philip Hammond to improve links between the Shanghai and the London stock exchanges to help Chinese businesses access capital on UK financial markets. That's good for financial services firms operating in London, and the enhancement of that Stock Connect scheme at the weekend offers new opportunities for British businesses in financial services in the UK.
Dr Luke Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Chancellor flew east, the pound plummeted south and government debt rocketed north. Why? Because the markets don't believe her plan for growth. This is the fundamental issue. So I'd like to pick up the question from my honourable friend from behind me, is what is she going to say to the markets to make them believe she really does understand how to deliver growth in the UK?
Chancellor. There's been global volatility in markets. I don't believe that it is reasonable to suggest that the reason why bond yields in the United States, in Germany and France have risen is because of decisions made by this government. I think the honourable member opposite should just get real.
Brian Leishman.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thanks to the Chancellor for her statement. In regards raising money for public services, then an annual wealth tax on the multimillionaire and billionaire class would certainly achieve that. However, a conversation for another day. On to China. My right honourable friend and I have had previous discussions regarding the closure of the Grangemouth refinery, of which PetroChina, part of the Chinese state-owned China National Petroleum Corporation, is heavily involved in. If the refinery closes, then thousands of jobs will be lost. This is not just a constituency issue for me. It will impact all of Scotland, as our fuel and national security will be severely weakened. Did the Chancellor speak about the issue with her Chinese counterparts, and if not, will she do so?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. We're working closely with the Scottish Government to ensure that there's a bright future for the people of Grangemouth, because deindustrialisation should not be the future for communities, including in Scotland.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, the data shows, Chancellor, in September and October that the economy is falling. It's going down. And the markets are expressing their clear concerns, the currency markets, the bond markets, in selling off, that actually there is no growth and that the economy continues to fall. If the Chancellor is so confident, can she confirm to the House when the economy will start growing again?
Chancellor.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. Growth is the #1 mission of this Labour government. But the truth is, it's not possible to turn things around quickly after 14 years of lacklustre growth and declining living standards from the party opposite. But we're leaving no stone unturned, which is why last week in China we secured £600 million worth of tangible benefits for the UK economy, helping great British businesses exporting overseas.
Nestle Calix-Scan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Chancellor agree with me that developing our economic and trading relationships with other nations is one of many important levers? And alongside that approach, public investment, planning reforms, and the absence under the Conservative government of industrial strategy, which was problematic, will be returned under this government so that we can see economic growth.
Chancellor.
The best way to grow an economy is to boost investment in an economy. And the truth is, under the Conservatives, we were the only G7 economy where investment stood at less than 20% of GDP. That is the inheritance that this party was bequeathed by the party opposite. And we're beginning to turn that around by the creation of a national wealth fund to leverage in private sector investment, planning reform to get Britain building again, and pensions reform to unlock £80 billion of investment to help small and start-up businesses to grow. We're turning things around after 14 years of failure from the party opposite.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. While the Chancellor was in China securing her measly £600 million, borrowing rates reached the highest that they have been since 2008. And in 2023, she said her budget would be a budget with real ambition to fix the foundations, a budget that would rebuild Britain. How's that going when her mess has caused the borrowing to be the highest it's been since 2008 and making real working people in this country suffer?
Well, I'm not sure if the honourable gentleman follows global financial markets, but borrowing costs for countries around the world have increased. But what we saw under Liz Truss's mini-budget was something unique to the United Kingdom, where it was just UK markets affected because of the decisions by the party opposite.
Chris MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's great to see our Chancellor of the Exchequer working with international business and winning investment for the UK. Yeah. Does she agree with me that whilst the party opposite were happy to sell out our heavy industry to China, leading to the end of steelmaking in Teesside after 150 years, our industrial strategy is delivering investment in steel, in chemicals and life sciences, in Stockton North, in Teesside and across the UK?
Chancellor.
The National Wealth Fund created by this government is to get investment into industries like carbon capture and storage, green hydrogen, ports, and indeed in steel. And we were really pleased at the end of last year to be able to announce investment in carbon capture and storage in Merseyside and Teesside, securing billions of pounds of investment into those economies and securing many thousands of jobs.
Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Chancellor for her statement. I do think it's worth reminding the House that under the previous government, business investment fell to 28 out of 31 OECD countries, lower than Latvia, Slovenia and Hungary. Could the Chancellor set out how our industrial strategy is going to overcome this terrible legacy on business investment left by the party opposite?
Chancellor.
Well, one of the reasons for such poor investment and the lowest investment out of all the G7 economies is because our planning system makes it so hard to get anything done in this country. And that's why the planning and infrastructure bill that's being brought forward by my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister, will turn that around, making it easier to invest in transport, in digital, in housing and so much more. That is the way to get our economy growing after 14 years of failure.
Carla Lockhart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Chancellor for her statement. China, New York, Washington, Toronto and Brussels to build economic relationships, yet won't take time to speak with the Ulster Farmers Union, the NFU, the Farmers Union of Wales, the NFU Scotland, to hear first-hand the devastating impact that her death tax is going to have on family farms and small businesses. When will the Chancellor realise, no matter what deals she does around the world, and I welcome them, Rome is burning around her. Agriculture is the backbone of our economy, and therefore will she commit to meet with me on behalf of the thousands of farmers whose farms are going to be decimated by her death tax?
Chancellor. I've had the opportunity on a couple of occasions now to meet the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister from Northern Ireland, and I'm sure that my right honourable friend, the Environment Secretary, would be happy to meet with colleagues from Northern Ireland. But the truth is, Madam Deputy Speaker, we inherited a £22 billion black hole in the public finances from the party opposite, and to ensure that we can stabilise our public finances, we had to make difficult decisions on taxes. And at the moment, we hear from the party opposites they don't like the increases in taxes, but they want the increases in public spending. Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, you can't have it both ways.
Polly Billington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome my right honourable friend's statement. Could she elaborate further how this visit and the discussions she has started are not just consistent with, but are a vital part of the government's approach to China? Cooperate where we can, compete where we need to, and challenge where we must.
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. This is the first economic and financial dialogue between our two countries since 2019, and since then other countries around the world have continued to engage with China, securing tangible benefits for their economies. I don't want UK businesses and people working in our country to miss out, and that's why this weekend we secured £600 million worth of tangible benefits for businesses exporting to China, therefore helping to create more good jobs, paying decent wages in our country.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm slightly worried that investors will be watching this statement and wonder what planet the Chancellor is on. She just said that she's investing in transport infrastructure. She's actually cutting transport capital budgets. She has previously said she wants only one budget a year, and the March statement is billed only as a fiscal forecast. Can she rule out any new tax rises or departmental spending cuts in the March budget, in the March statement, or will the fiscal forecast become an emergency budget?
Chancellor.
We've committed to have just one budget a year to provide businesses with the certainty that they need to invest. So we will have an update from the OBR in March. But I can also give this commitment. I set out, as I've already said, the fiscal rules that we will balance day-to-day spending with tax receipts, and we will get debt down as a share of GDP within the forecast period, and we will continue at all times to meet those fiscal rules.
Tony Vaughan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I congratulate the Chancellor on unlocking £1 billion of value for the UK economy, which would not have been unlocked if she hadn't gone to China.
Exactly.
Does she agree with me, though, that the government's decision to thaw UK-China relations, which was much needed, is reaping dividends now, and that while also allowing us to press China on difficult issues, including human rights and labour standards?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question, and that's exactly right. We managed to secure tangible benefits for the UK economy and British businesses exporting. At the same time, we were able to make and raise difficult issues that we would not be able to raise if we weren't engaged. That's the benefits of being able to engage. You get the benefits and you can raise those tricky issues.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's beyond parody that His Majesty's Chancellor would go and throw herself at the mercy of the Chinese government and come back with £600 million over 5 years in revenue. Is she aware that £600 million in revenue is less than 1/90th of HSBC's annual profit? This is what she's holding up as a major achievement by the Treasury on their trade mission. But in answer to my right honourable friend from Aberdeen South, who very reasonably asked when, not if, when her fiscal rules are breached, which will she do? Increase borrowing, raise taxes or cut spending? Not over 5 years, this year.
Chancellor.
Well, I'm sure that the honourable gentleman opposite is an expert in HSBC, but I would rather take the words of the chairman of HSBC, who welcomed the tangible investments and indeed led the financial forum that we also held last week in China. I've been really clear. We will meet our fiscal rules that I set out in the budget, and we will do that at all times, and that is the commitment that I made and a commitment that I continue to make.
Deirdre Costigan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Would the Chancellor confirm that for her, growth must always go hand in hand with economic security, a lesson that the previous Conservative government refused to learn when they left 85% of us dependent on expensive foreign gas to heat our homes this winter?
Chancellor.
I thank my honourable friend for that question. This government's clean energy mission will mean that we are less reliant on foreign dictators for our basic energy needs. That's why we're investing with carbon capture and storage, with floating offshore wind, and indeed getting rid of the absurd ban on onshore wind that the previous government brought in.
Harriet Cross.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor referred to safeguarding national security in her statement, which I welcome, but this must include energy security. Yet her changes to the energy profits levy, removing investment allowances and not permitting new licences at a time when we are still reliant on oil and gas, not only undermines our energy security, but it is also dwarfing the 600 million that she has brought back from China with the £12 billion of tax revenues that will be lost from the sector. Why, rather than supporting our energy security, is the Chancellor turning her back on the sector, turning her back on these tax revenues and risking selling our energy security to China?
Chancellor.
Well, the Honourable Lady just has a brief look at the documents from the Office of Budget Responsibility. She will see that the changes to the energy profits levy, taking up the tax rate from 75% to 78%, the same rate as it is in Norway, raises money. It doesn't lose it.
Yeah. Lindsay Farnsworth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I commend the Chancellor for her visit to advocate for our country's best interests, but does she agree with me that Chinese companies must not provide any support to Putin's illegal war in Ukraine?
Chancellor.
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and I raised such issues with my counterparts in China at the weekend. It's really important that whenever we engage with foreign governments, that we also raise issues consistent with our values, including Chinese companies supplying Russian government with materials that are used in Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine.
Jim Allister.
Did the Chancellor raise any concerns, or indeed does she have any concerns, about the Confucius Institute, the Chinese government-backed operation across the United Kingdom? Did she raise any concerns about that? And in respect of Jimmy Lai, what answer did she get?
Chancellor.
When our Prime Minister met with President Xi Jinping in Rio last year, they agreed that one of the points of re-engagement was that we were able to make clear our concerns about a range of issues, but in a way that was private, and I'm not going to go into the details of that conversations, but with all of the Chinese officials that I met at the weekend, I raised these issues. And the problem is that the party opposite, for all their chuntering, they didn't raise these issues because they didn't even engage.
Ben Coleman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my constituents in Chelsea and Fulham, many of whom work in financial services, will have been amazed, I think, just as I was now, when the Shadow Chancellor, in a fit of pique, demanded that the Chancellor should have come home from China to talk to him in this House, rather than promote growth, access to the world's second largest market, and winning new licences, winning quota allocations for financial services businesses, with, as anybody who's taken the trouble to listen carefully to the Chancellor will have recognised, more on the way. So what does the Chancellor think the city and the banks that accompanied her would have preferred in the long-term interests of this country? Stay in China to win for this country, or come home to satisfy the Shadow Chancellor's fit of pique?
Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Well, you just have to look at what the businesses have already said about the deal that we managed to secure last week. Tangible benefits for British businesses exporting to China, helping to create more good jobs, paying decent wages here in Britain. It's been welcomed by businesses. It's a shame that the party opposite no longer stands up for British businesses.
Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We have an embargo on Russian oil and gas. China continues to import it, and apparently Russia will be China's #1 supplier this year. Did she raise this with her counterparts on her trip to China? And what assessment has she made of her deal so that it doesn't inadvertently support the Russian war effort?
Chancellor.
As I've already said in the House today, I raised the issue about Chinese companies supplying the Russian government. I raised those issues. And indeed, the honourable member will know that last week, alongside the United States, we increased sanctions on Russian oil and gas to make it harder for Putin to continue to conduct his illegal war.
Chris Vince.
Deputy Speaker, can the Chancellor outline how this visit is an example of ongoing dialogue with the international community which will benefit businesses and residents in my constituency of Harlow? And while we're quoting Shakespeare, will she agree with me that there's something rotten in the state of the Conservative Party? or perhaps the Conservative Party is in a rotten state?
Chancellor.
I'm glad that my honourable friend has used the 50 minutes of this statement to come up with such a good line. Look, my honourable friend is absolutely right that many people working in Harlow work in the financial services sector and will very much welcome the enhanced licences and quotas and licences, incidentally, that many other countries and their banks already have because their governments have engaged with China. Those are opportunities that we've missed out on in Britain for far too long because for 6 years we failed to be involved in an economic and financial dialogue whilst other governments cracked on and made sure that they supported and stood up for their national interest.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Notwithstanding the importance of China as a trading partner, can the Chancellor please explain to the House what steps the government is taking to address the issues of forced labour links with Uyghur workers in supply chains and fast fashion companies like Shein? Can the Minister provide data on the extent of forced labour in UK supply chains, especially in the garment sector, and outline any actions to strengthen due diligence requirements for companies sourcing from known human rights abuse areas like Xinjiang?
Chancellor.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. As I've already set out, one of the issues that I was able to raise with my counterparts in China was issues around forced labour, particularly in Xinjiang. And as I said in answer to the question from the right honourable gentleman, the member for Chingford and Wood Green, I also have been really clear that any company seeking to list in London has to meet stringent requirements as set out by the United Nations and the OECD on labour supply and the treatment of workers.
Final question in this statement, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Whilst I welcome the UK-China Economic and Financial Dialogue Agreement, however, as Chair, and the Chancellor will know this, however, as Chair of the APPG for Freedom of Religious Belief, I have repeatedly in this House highlighted human rights abuses in China, with the Uyghur Muslims, with Tibetan Buddhists, with Christians in Hong Kong and China. How will the Government and the Chancellor ensure safeguards to British money and goods are put in place to ensure that economic engagements do not directly support these violations? Human rights concerns, forced labour, denial of religious freedom, ongoing suppression in Xinjiang, Tibet, Hong Kong and Taiwan must be remembered at all costs in all deals with China. Thank you.
Answer the Exchequer.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that thoughtful question. It's important that when we engage with China that we cooperate where we can compete where necessary, but that we challenge whenever our values do not align. Like the honourable gentleman, I care deeply about issues of religious freedom and also about issues of forced labour. But that's the whole point about engaging, because you have to engage in the world as it is, not as the world as we would like it to be. And it is through these engagements that we are able to raise even some of the most difficult of issues and be very clear about the values of our great country.
That concludes the statement, and I'll now give a few moments for the front benches to swap over. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion. 10-minute rule motion. Joe Morris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Secretary of State to conduct a review of the contribution of community energy to the Government's 2030 Clean Power Mission. The Green Power Mission and climate policy more generally is what brought me into politics. Ensuring that we have a world that is economically, ecologically and environmentally viable for future generations is one of the reasons that I'm privileged to stand in this House today, and one of the reasons that many people across that constituency put their faith in me. I want to thank local climate groups such as the Hexham Climate Cafe, the North Tyne Climate Action Group and Sustain